Imagine this for a moment. You've finally planned that long overseas trip you've been dreaming about. Maybe it's visiting family abroad. Maybe it's a relaxing holiday after decades of hard work. You book your flights, pack your bags, and leave Australia knowing that your age pension will continue supporting you while you're away. But here's something many Australian seniors don't realise. If you stay outside Australia for more than 6 weeks, your Centrelink payments can start to change, sometimes automatically, even if you did nothing wrong. And for some pensioners, the surprise doesn't come until they check their bank account and notice their payment is suddenly smaller than expected. This is where many retirees get caught off guard. Because while the age pension itself can usually continue during overseas travel, certain supplements and benefits can stop or reduce once you pass the 6-week mark. Now let me be very clear about something. This video is not about creating alarm. It's about making sure Australian seniors and pension recipients understand the rules before they travel, so there are no unpleasant surprises. Every year, thousands of pensioners travel overseas for extended visits. Some stay with family for several months. Others take long holidays they've waited their whole lives for. And in most cases, travel itself is absolutely allowed while receiving the age pension. However, Centrelink has specific time limits and portability rules that determine what happens to your payments while you are outside Australia. And one of the most important limits is the 6-week travel threshold. Once you cross that point, certain parts of your payment can change automatically. Later in this video, we'll also talk about another rule that many people overlook, the 26-week overseas rule, which can affect how much pension you receive if you stay abroad for longer periods. But first, we need to clearly understand what happens during the first 6 weeks of travel, and what changes once that period passes. Because a simple misunderstanding about these time limits can sometimes reduce your payment more than you expected. So in today's Centrelink Masterclass, we will break this down step by step in simple language. You'll learn what happens to your age pension during the first 6 weeks overseas, which payments or supplements change after 6 weeks, how longer trips can affect your pension in 2026, and the most common mistakes pensioners make when traveling abroad. If you or someone you know is planning to travel outside Australia while receiving the age pension, this is information you absolutely need to know before you leave. Because when it comes to Centrelink rules, being informed is the best way to protect your retirement income. Now let's talk about the rule that surprises many pensioners the most, the 6-week overseas travel rule. If you are receiving the age pension and you leave Australia for a holiday, family visit, or short trip, the good news is that your pension can usually continue while you are overseas. But the key question is how long you stay outside Australia. For the first 6 weeks, which is 42 days, most age pension recipients will continue receiving their payments exactly the same way as they would inside Australia. That means your basic age pension amount continues, and your normal payment schedule through Centrelink remains unchanged. For many seniors, this means a short holiday overseas does not affect their pension at all. However, things begin to change once you pass the 6-week mark outside Australia. And this is where many people get caught off guard. After 6 weeks overseas, 2 parts of the age pension payment may change automatically. The first change involves the energy supplement. The energy supplement is a small payment included in the pension that helps Australians cover energy and utility costs. But this supplement is generally only paid while you are living in Australia. So once you have been overseas for more than 6 weeks, the energy supplement usually stops. For example, in 2026 the energy supplement is roughly around $14 per fortnight for single pensioners, around $21 per fortnight combined for couples. Now that might not sound like a large amount, but over time, it still means your total pension payment becomes smaller while you are overseas. The second change involves the pension supplement. After 6 weeks outside Australia, the pension supplement is reduced to the basic rate only. This means some components of the supplement are removed, because they are designed to support services used mainly inside Australia. So while your core age pension usually continues, your overall payment amount can decrease slightly once you pass the 6-week travel threshold. Another important thing to understand is that these changes are often automatic. Centrelink receives travel information through Australian immigration departure and arrival records, which means your travel dates are usually recorded without you needing to report them separately. This system helps ensure payments are adjusted according to the official rules. And again, this is not about punishment or penalties. These rules exist because certain parts of the pension are intended to support living costs inside Australia, not overseas living. So if you're planning a trip longer than 6 weeks, it's very important to understand that your payment breakdown may change, even though your age pension itself continues. And for seniors planning longer stays abroad, perhaps visiting family for several months, there is another time limit that becomes very important. That next rule is the 26-week overseas threshold, and it can affect how much pension you receive depending on how long you have lived and worked in Australia. We'll explain that shortly. But first, let's talk about what happens during the period between 6 weeks and 26 weeks overseas, because there are a few additional things pensioners should know before planning longer travel. Now that we understand what happens after the first 6 weeks, the next important period to understand is the time between 6 weeks and 26 weeks overseas. Many Australian seniors travel for longer than 6 weeks, especially when visiting family abroad or taking extended holidays after retirement. And during this period, the age pension can usually continue, but there are a few important things pensioners need to know. First, your core age pension payment generally keeps going while you are overseas during this time. However, as we explained earlier, once you pass the 6-week mark, some components of your payment may already have changed. The energy supplement normally stops, and the pension supplement is reduced to the basic rate. That means your total pension payment may already be slightly lower than what you receive inside Australia. But there are also a few additional practical issues that can affect pensioners traveling during this period. One example involves the pensioner concession card. This card gives many Australian seniors access to important benefits such as cheaper medicines under the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, discounts on medical services, and various state or local concessions. However, if you remain outside Australia for more than 6 weeks, your pensioner concession card may stop while you are overseas. For many pensioners, this isn't a major problem during a holiday, but it's important to understand that these benefits are generally designed for use within Australia. The good news is that when you return to Australia and continue meeting eligibility rules, the card is usually restored automatically. Another factor to consider during longer travel is budget planning. Because once certain supplements stop after 6 weeks, the amount arriving in your bank account may be slightly lower than usual. For pensioners planning a 2-month or 3-month visit overseas, this small reduction can add up over time. So it's always wise to check your expected payment amount before traveling, especially if you plan to stay overseas for several months. Now there's also something else that many pensioners misunderstand. Some people assume that as long as they return to Australia within 6 months, their pension will always stay the same. But that isn't always true. Because once your trip reaches 26 weeks outside Australia, another rule begins to apply, and that rule can sometimes have a much bigger impact on how much age pension you receive. This rule is connected to something called your Australian Working Life Residence. And if you've never heard that term before, don't worry. In the next section, we'll explain exactly what it means and why it can matter for seniors who spend long periods overseas. Now we come to the rule that can have a much bigger impact on your age pension if you stay overseas for a longer period. This is known as the 26-week rule. For many Australian seniors, the first 6 weeks are the most talked about. But the 26-week threshold is actually where the pension system can start applying stricter rules. So what exactly happens after 26 weeks outside Australia? In many cases, your age pension can still continue. But the amount you receive may depend on something called your Australian Working Life Residence, often shortened to AWLR. Now that term might sound complicated, but the concept itself is quite simple. Your Australian Working Life Residence refers to the number of years you have lived in Australia between the age of 16 and your age pension age. This number is important because it helps determine whether you qualify for the full portable age pension when living or staying overseas for extended periods. Here is a simple way to understand it. If you have lived in Australia for 35 years or more during your working life, you will usually continue receiving the full age pension rate even if you remain overseas longer than 26 weeks. However, if your Australian Working Life Residence is less than 35 years, Centrelink may apply what is called a proportional pension rate. This means your age pension payment may be reduced based on the number of years you lived in Australia. For example, imagine someone lived in Australia for 20 years during their working life. If they stay overseas longer than 26 weeks, their pension may be adjusted to reflect those 20 years rather than the full 35-year benchmark. This is where some pensioners experience a larger payment reduction than they expected, because they assumed the pension would remain the same regardless of how long they stayed overseas. Another thing to understand is that certain additional payments may also stop if you are away from Australia for extended periods. For example, some benefits such as rent assistance generally do not continue for long-term overseas stays. Again, this is not designed to punish pensioners. These rules exist because certain payments are meant to support living costs inside Australia, not permanent or long-term residence overseas. That's why understanding the 26-week rule is especially important for seniors who plan extended trips, such as spending several months with family overseas or considering part-time living outside Australia during retirement. Even a trip that begins as a short visit can sometimes stretch longer than expected. And if you cross the 26-week threshold without planning for it, your age pension payment could be affected. This is why it's always wise to review your residency history and payment eligibility before planning very long trips abroad. Because once you understand how the system works, it becomes much easier to plan your travel without putting your retirement income at risk. By this point, you can probably see that traveling overseas while receiving the age pension is absolutely possible. But many Australian seniors run into problems not because the rules are unfair, but because they simply didn't know about them in advance. So before we finish, let's talk about some of the most common mistakes pensioners make when traveling overseas, and more importantly, how you can avoid them. The first mistake is assuming nothing will change if the trip is temporary. Many pensioners believe that if they are only traveling for a holiday or family visit, their payments will remain exactly the same. But as we discussed earlier, once you pass 6 weeks outside Australia, the energy supplement usually stops and the pension supplement is reduced. Even though the main age pension continues, your total payment amount can drop slightly. The second mistake is not checking travel dates carefully. Sometimes a trip planned for 4 or 5 weeks unexpectedly turns into a longer stay, perhaps because family asks you to stay longer or travel plans change. But if that trip crosses the 6-week threshold, the payment adjustments can start automatically. And if the trip extends beyond 26 weeks, the rules connected to Australian Working Life Residence may apply. Another common mistake is not reviewing your payment details before leaving Australia. Many seniors simply assume their bank deposits will remain unchanged while they travel. But Centrelink payments can include several components, and some of those components are only designed for people living in Australia. That's why it's always wise to check your expected payment amount before traveling, especially if you are planning a longer overseas stay. So what should pensioners do before leaving Australia? Here are a few simple steps that can help protect your pension. First, review your travel plans carefully. If your trip may last longer than 6 weeks, be prepared for small changes in your payment. Second, check your Centrelink account through MyGov before you leave. This can help you understand how your payment may look while you are overseas. Third, make sure your contact details and banking information are up to date. so there are no delays in receiving your payments. And finally, if you are planning a very long stay overseas, it may be worth reviewing your Australian working life residence history to understand whether the 26-week rule could affect your pension. Now remember, traveling in retirement should be something to enjoy, not something that creates financial stress. The good news is that most pensioners can travel overseas without losing their age pension, as long as they understand the key time limits and how the rules work. And as we always say here on Centrelink Masterclass, this is not about alarm, it's about being informed. Because when you understand the rules before you travel, you can plan your trip with confidence and avoid unexpected surprises. If you found this guide helpful, consider subscribing to Centrelink Masterclass for more clear explanations about pension rules, payment updates, and important changes affecting Australian seniors. And if you know another pensioner who is planning an overseas trip, feel free to share this video with them. It could help them avoid a costly misunderstanding. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next Centrelink Masterclass.